So, welcome to this second afternoon session of abstract presentations. The first presentation is Eric Kerner, who will give us a presentation about the federated content search advancing the common search infrastructure. So, please, Eric, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello and welcome. That's my agenda. I will first give a brief introduction and then go over what's FCS, how it can be extended, then some example extensions or some extensions we are working on, then a bit about the front end, and then the current state of affairs and what you can look forward to. Yeah, I'm Eric Kerner, and I'm the current maintainer and developer for the FCS in CLARIN and in the German Text Plus consortium. I'm a computer scientist and studied at Leipzig University in Germany, and currently working in digital humanities at the Saxon Academy of Sciences and Humanities in Leipzig. The German Text Plus consortium is part of the German National Research Data Infrastructure and had one action point or measure to add support for some content search in resources. And FCS was an existing system and was a good fit for us, so it's now the main distributed content search infrastructure on Text Plus. But yeah, it was initially developed or created in CLARIN. Starting with pre-FCS, there were a variety of textual resources, corpora, tools, etc., often only available at their own centers and institutes. So there were issues like what resources are out there. So you often were not aware what resources existed for you. And then also, how can I use them? And even if you know there's a resource, is it even relevant for your research? So what's in this resource? So there was a requirement and a want to have some content search, but still through distributed resources. We don't want to aggregate all resources and build some central index like Google, but still keep the resources at their location, but allow a way to search through them without removing the resources due to legal reasons and so on. And so the solution came from CLARIN with this federated content search. This started in 2011 as a working group, but then there were developments of various specifications. With legacy, then the Core 1 specification, and in 2016, the Core 2.0 specification, which is the current standard and most feature-rich one. What is the FCS? The FCS is not only the search infrastructure that CLARIN uses, but also the interface specification, how endpoints and clients communicate with each other. Also the software ecosystem, so what tools exist there, what endpoint implementations. And the FCS basically allows the search for lexical patterns in distributed text collections. And another way to refer to it would be a federated corpus query platform. The infrastructure looks like this. At the bottom, we have the local data collections at the institutes, often distributed geographically. And on the top, the client, which the user would interact with. And because it aggregates results, it's called often the FCS aggregator. And then, importantly, in the center, we have this endpoint layer. Those are the translation layers between the user requests for some patterns in lexical resources and those local data collections and search engines that often have custom data structures, query languages, and there has to be some translation layer to convert them. And this whole infrastructure is extendable. The current status is that we work with this FCS Core 2 specification, but there are many extension drafts in the works. And participants, as of the day of yesterday, or the day before yesterday, We're in CLARIN 18 centers with 500 resources in 180 languages. And in Text Plus, there are some overlap between institutes, but there are also some German ones. There are 15 institutes with 440 resources in a bit less languages. But there's an active process of integrating new endpoints and resources. The software ecosystem is actively maintained, so if there are bugs, if there are some new features, those will be integrated, mainly in Java, but they also started to translate this to Python. And there are various endpoint implementations based on those different local systems. I tried to collect all I know in this awesome list, but it's also not complete. And then there's a community with this CLARIN forum, there are also various FCS topics, and there are community activities like FCS hackathons, and also codes and materials that were created over time. And because this protocol was specified to be extensible, there came various needs over time. For example, the request for accessing restricted resources with some authentication mechanism. Then also primarily in Text Plus, integration of lexical resources and also the entity search, but also some still in the ideation phase, like custom font rendering to support resources that can't be displayed with standard UTF-8, some metadata for results to provide better contextualization or also downstream faceting, and for example also syntactic search, for example for tree banks, because often times it's more flat resources that can be searched through. And now to the first extension, the Lex FCS. The FCS originally only supports text streams. That means plain text or also audio transcription, which is basically one string of text with optional annotation layers on top. But we miss out on various lexical resources like dictionaries, wordnets that are structurally completely different. So how to best integrate them into the FCS? Naturally, we need some customization, and this is quite extensive because we need some custom query languages, a new data model, and also new data views for visualization. As a model, you can see here, we thought about for a single lemma, there would be one entry, and in this entry we have fields with information that can have certain values. For example, we have a part of speech information, and then we have University Dependency Posttext or SCTS in German, and then other information like a lemma form. And those are key value-based information, and for this we thought the contextual query language, the CQL, would be a good fit for querying. So we defined some operators we want to use for some relations and modifiers, and also indexes. This means the fields we can search on. And to serialize this, we create the new Lex data view. And we then can offer custom rendering. So based on this Watch at Leipzig example for this noun car, or Auto in German, we have, for example, some concurrence graphs, some example sentences, some topics or some categorization, some other grammatical information. This then can be transformed in this Lex data view, some XML structure with fields and values. And this can be used to render this in this, for now, this form, where we have some grammatical information on the left, and then a bit of full text with definition or etymology information on the right, and some synonyms, related information, senses. And we thought, well, there came various requirements. For example, some dictionaries have more hierarchical structure for definitions, so this was implemented. Then some dictionaries provide some audio, some speech version of this lemma. So if this is specified, we can offer this. We also offer translation. For example, if we have some post-text set that's known to us because it's, for example, UD. Then we can offer translations. This whole user interface is translatable. And also some grouping or some relations between values. If you hover over a sense, for example, we can then refer or see which hypernyms fit to the sense, which definition does the sense have, and this allows grouping of information. So it's not loosely there as sets, but can be coupled together. And then also some citations. The next extension is this entity search, because we thought, there are various resources that have entity annotations, special editions, but also sometimes in corpora or dictionaries with senses. And it would be a good way to have the option to search through this, because this allows, for example, to find lexical variants or for historical forms, for example, for Leipzig or Klein Paris, which is a different description for Leipzig. We can also disambiguate between homonyms, for example, bank or persons with the same name have different entity IDs. And if you search for a certain person, you don't want results from the other in context. And also, really interesting for us to integrate different resources, because we have senses and entity IDs. We could integrate resources from different locations, like different dictionaries with frequency information, with some grammatical information, and then examples from a corpus. And we did the first prototype here, where we have some option to provide hints for Leipzig. Then we can find in this GND, the gemeinsame Normdatei, which is entity graph from the German National Library. Then we have 7 entity types with various entities. And we can then search, for example, for this entity in the text, find references, and can also pull external information to augment results we have. Yeah, and because we are developing a lot, we built some alternative front end, and this is reusable and customizable. This is also in some CLARIN forum post. It's fast responsive, but also multilingual, and it's a new feature, more extensive and interactive help, which is also probably nice for new users. It's a lot of features. And we built on top of new or modern technologies like Ru3 and Udify as front-end library. There we can also try out new visualization approaches that are not a good fit for this older FCS aggregator, but will be later ported back. And we can also integrate, because it's a smaller context in Germany, new extensions like this Lex FCS and this entity search. So we have some history function, we have some faceting based on these languages, we have feedback, how many resources are there. This is a content search, but it's another display or another view mode to see quickly where are the results and how many, and how many are still waiting. It's also customizable, so we can, for example, change the color, this label could change, and so on. So it's, you can basically integrate this into your own institution page. And what's the current state? There's active work in the FCS with development, for example, with focus on the lexical resources. And we are still in discussion with users and data providers about requirements and so on. The learning materials for users and developers are being reorganized and created, and there's coming more and more. So we also offer better development support for endpoints like endpoint validators, archetypes for project creation. We have various activities like the FCS hackathon in 2 days, poster sessions like later, and another session, locations, papers, presentations, and also the CLARIN forum. And plans for the future is this AI support, some modernization for this older content search front end with using modern web standards and new features. For this, the development materials, and also to add more endpoints and more resources. There are various links, but this is for later, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Eric, for your nice presentation about the advances on the federated content search. And now questions, comments.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Very interesting presentation. I wondered about your future plans on AI support. What kind of technologies are you planning to support?
Basically, what CLARIN already offers, this Shibboleth-based stuff with this new proxy approach. There would be more options, but basically in this way, there's some token, but you have to log in with this federated login, and then there's probably some role like academic level or some email address that's forwarded to the endpoint, and the endpoint can then decide based on this information whether to offer results or not.
Yeah, I have a question related to digital humanities in particular. I mean, how can we extend the federated content search for corpora of cultural interest in a certain sense? I mean, literary corpora and so on that have some specific metadata also, and for example, in which we need citations and quotations that are very precise and references that must be shaped in a certain way that are recognizable for the literary, in the domain of literary studies. And so.
Yeah, I think in this German Text Plus project, we also have this issue with editions. There are information basically in this text and positions where we have some words that's explained in more detail in the larger text, but this is still ongoing. I would be happy to discuss this in more detail later, but this is not that easy to create or to develop for, so we have to look. But if there are different requirements and feedbacks from various resources, this would be good for creating a new extension, or whether to just adjust the existing framework.
Yes, and just some clarifications as well, because FCS is augmenting your search engines and is a way to enable a higher level of discovery, so that you can actually say, okay, this is a corpora or corpus for me, or these are for me as well, not the other ones. So in that way, we need to keep the low threshold that we have, so that people can actually provide their resources into this. We need to think about, okay, this is a way to support discovery of resources rather than do actual querying full features and full on. So yeah, okay, thank you.
Exactly, it's more about a general layer of discovery and showing results, and not trying to support everything that resource can support, which is often better on this institution page. We only want to have some quick view, is this relevant for me? And then you can often better search at this location, for example, at the institute or the center. But for lexical resources, this was a bit difficult with this standard approach, so that's why there's an extra extension. Thank you.
We move now to the second presentation. Jakub Lenardic and Kristina Paodemati-Tekavcic. They will present Jacob will present the citation of language resources technologies in CLARIN. So.
Hello, everyone. So today I'll be going about this presentation about the citation practices in our community in a sort of threefold manner. And first I'll present basically a review of how language resource technologies are cited by CLARIN affiliated authors. Next, I'll present a review of existing guidelines by CLARIN centers, and finally, I'll end the presentation with a proposal based on these gaps that we've identified. So what we first did is we surveyed how language resource technologies had been cited in the abstracts of last year's conference. And now first, what I mean by language resource technologies are chiefly corpora, then language processing tools, language models, and lexical resources such as dictionaries, morphological lexica, as well as glossaries. And when we looked at the proceedings, it turned out that there were 189 such citations across 27 abstracts. Now, on the basis of these citations, we've managed to identify 5 citation strategies. And these are given here in the table on the slide. And I'll now go through all these strategies, I'll exemplify them, and comment on their appropriateness, basically from the point of view of best practice. Now, the first strategy is the one that we label LRT citation, and this one accounts for 11% of cases. And this is basically the strategy where you actually cite the resource or the tool. And on the slide, the example here is given for how such a citation would look like for the Icelandic pronunciation dictionary. And this is, to our minds, one of the 2 most appropriate ways of going about resource or tool citation. And this is because, in this case, you're actually acknowledging human authorship, which is basically important from the perspective of scholarly credit. But it's also important from other principles like FAIR, since this way you're ensuring proper findability as well as access. Now, by contrast, the second strategy is called paper about the language resource technology, and this is, in comparison to the previous one, much more widely used. And here what the authors do who employ this strategy is they basically just cite a publication that is somehow related to the resource or tool. But what they don't do is provide a citation for the resource or tool itself. And again, this is, I suppose, is a good way to basically acknowledge the authors, but you aren't really ensuring findability or accessibility, at least not directly. Now, the third strategy is labeled paper and LRT citation, and it's a combination of the previous 2, where you're basically referring to both the paper as well as the repository entry. And this is likely the best strategy from this sort of maximal perspective, but it's also the one that was most seldom employed. And the fourth strategy, which is actually the most common one, is just to provide a URL to the resource or tool. And usually this URL is given as a footnote, and only sometimes it's given as a persistent identifier, which is especially interesting in cases where the persistent identifiers actually exist. Now, what's interesting here is that there are many cases where authors use this strategy in spite of the fact that the repository gives explicit instructions on how to cite the entry, including information on the names of the authors as well as the actual repository entry. Now, the last strategy is to basically cite a related paper and to provide a URL to the resource or tool in the text. And this also isn't an optimal way since the repository entry, again, isn't provided. Now, because these citing strategies are a bit heterogeneous, what we subsequently did is we surveyed the existing citation instructions of the CLARIN B centers. And what we took into account was all the 22 centers that had B status certification in April. Now, there were overall 2 bigger findings, and the first was that most, but not all, of the centers actually do provide citation instructions for the repository entries. And the other was that there sometimes exist citation instructions, but they are just for the related paper. Now, the slide gives the more fine-grained findings and of the survey basically related to those 15 centers that provide citation instructions. And here we looked at 4 types of citation metadata in the survey, and the first is authorship, and we found that there's some interesting variation here as well. And the first thing is that 12 out of the 22 centers basically provide explicit instructions to cite the human authors of the resource or tool, which, like I said before, isn't a given. In regards to the other 10 centers, authorship instructions were basically fully missing for 4 centers and were inconsistent for 6 centers, which is here shown by the question mark. And so what this question mark shows is basically centers who are inconsistent in what they actually consider to be authorship. And in many cases, this centers list basically non-human entities such as laboratory or institutes as the authors of a resource or tool. And this is, for instance, here the case of the for some L2 corpus of spontaneous English. But this isn't really compliant, for instance, from the perspective of the joint declaration of the data citation principles, since those basically explicitly call for human authorship, again, because of scholarly credit. And finally, the rest of the metadata that we surveyed, so things like year of publication, publisher, and persistent identifier, that wasn't really problematic. But I do think that some things could be, I guess, a bit more explicitly stated, especially the need to use persistent identifiers, I guess, rather than the non-persistent URLs that they resolve to. Now, on the basis of these 2 surveys, basically we came up an explicit proposal based on, which is not that novel perhaps, but it is explicit on how these resources and tools should be cited. And the proposal is here on the slide, and we call it the book analogy. And it basically states that any kind of language resource technology, so whether it be a corpus tool or language model, it doesn't really matter, each should be cited basically as you would otherwise cite a printed book, just with the obligatory addition of the persistent identifier. So basically there are 2 main points of this analogy, and I'll walk us through them now. So basically the first point pertains to the required citation elements. And here we believe that basically only the 5 that are listed here on the slide are both sufficient and necessary for resource and tool citation. And these are human authorship, the title of the resource, the year of publication, the publisher, which is the repository, as well as the persistent identifier. And as we'll see shortly, this isn't as self-evident as it might seem at first sight. Now, what's important to mention here is basically the CLARIN DSpace-based repositories are already quite in line with this. And since this sort of big yellow citation box that accompanies each repository entry at the top contains precisely these elements, the DSpace repositories just aren't really in line with our proposal stylistically, but I'll talk about that a bit later. And what's interesting, though, is that certain other repositories basically often define other citation elements as well. And I have here an example of the citation instructions for a corpus from the French Ortholangue repository. And what you can see here underlined basically is that the citation instructions explicitly call for citing both the resource type, so explicitly specifying as a corpus, as well as the version of the resource, so version 1 in this case. Now, to my mind, both of these things are basically redundant as citation elements. First, the version always follows from the persistent identifier, since the CLARIN repositories each assign a new version assign a new persistent identifier to each new version of a resource or tool. And there are also other widely used conventions, like specifying the version number of the actual title of the resource. And second, the resource type, like, it follows from the title. And when it doesn't, then it's usually when the title is basically not transparent enough in any case. So this is more of an argument to define guidelines for, for naming resources or tools. Now, this point the next point might be a bit controversial, but there are citation recommendations that also claim that in certain cases, like in language documentation, non-author contributor should be acknowledged in the citation as well. However, I think having two author types in the citation would overtly complicate things, and this is especially true in relation basically to the stylistic point of the proposal that I'll shortly turn to. Since resources or tools without this authorial complexity, they already have a problem with fitting in with existing bibliographic types. Now, before concluding this section, here I'd like to point out that our proposal is basically a stronger version of Conzet and De Smet's minimal bibliographic template. And what's stronger here is that we're being explicitly prescriptive about basically including human authorship rather than anything else. Now, lastly, no, this is style. Yeah, lastly, style. What's interesting here is that the stylistic formatting of resource and tool citation like books is already implicit in the aforementioned yellow box citations. However, this is not the case basically in the BibTeX exports that these repositories offer, since the export there is into the miscellaneous type. However, the problem with miscellaneous type is that it doesn't really conform to any well-known bibliographic type, unlike the book citations. And here I have an example using APA. So with miscellaneous type, you don't get, for instance, the italic formatting of the resource name, and the publisher has to be specified as a bracketed note, otherwise it doesn't get spelled out in the bibliography. Now, by contrast, specifying a resource or tool as a book in BibTeX gets you these italics as well as the non-parenthetical formatting of the publisher. And this is actually in line with the sort of conventional approaches to basically stylistic formatting that you often find in the related literature. And I think this is also underscored by the fact that in BibTeX there exists a data set type which has basically the same output as a book citation. So our proposal here would be basically just to change the BibTeX export to either the miscellaneous, from the miscellaneous type to either the book or data set type. Now here I'd like to conclude the presentation. So the first point is that I actually think that the existing CLARIN P-Center guidelines are actually very good, both qualitatively and in terms of coverage, by which I mean that the majority of centers already provide good and visible citation instructions. Well, and in spite of that fact, the actual citation practice is a bit all over the place, given the heterogeneity of the survey results that they showed at the beginning of the presentation. So what I think is important here first and foremost is basically awareness raising. Now, the last point is that what's currently not possible in most of the repositories is to export citations in these various existing bibliographic formats, so like APA, MLA, Harvard, and such. But I think that the issue here is basically precisely tied to this miscellaneous formatting, which, like I said, doesn't conform to really anything. However, if the formatting were like that of a printed books, then I think you'd have a good framework basically to define these exports automatically. This is it for my presentation. Thank you.
Jacob, thank you very much for the presentation. Just for one clarification, at some point you said, okay, if a corpus has the tag of miscellaneous, then please turn it into books or data set. But if it's a data set, why don't they say it's a data set? If you say it can also be a book, then you introduce new confusion. So maybe I was not clear about what the idea was.
Thank you very much for the question. It's simply because in terms of LaTeX and BibTeX, the book entry is well known. The dataset entry really isn't, but it outputs the same thing. So if you use LaTeX, you're I think much more aware of the first one. But I don't know, some people might be weirded out by specifying them as books, but essentially the type of information that you have to provide for corpora is basically the same as you would for a book, in contrast to a journal or a book chapter. Yeah, thank you.
So thanks for the presentation. Question, did you consider the possibility or the desirability of having machine actionable citations? And with that I mean that where does the handle point to, or where does the URI point to? Does it point to a landing page, which is interesting for humans, of course? or does it point to the data directly, which can be analyzed by machines and maybe do a fair assessment on that type of data?
Thank you very much. No, we didn't, but that's a very good follow-up for future work, because I do know for a fact, like anecdotally, that especially in the VLO, you often come across entries that will just resolve to the XML look, for instance, and not to the actual repository entry. But we haven't, so thank you.
You can indicate that in the citation, of course. Where does the handle point to?
Sorry?
You can indicate that in the citation text.
Yeah.
Where does it point to?
Can I? Yeah. Jacob. Yeah, can I? Okay, I'm here. I was wondering if I cite a resource and there is a good publication that is clearly describing the resource, I tend to cite the publication, because it's a peer-reviewed publication. And I think it's important to cite peer-reviewed publications. And it might have a DOI, and I would suppose that that peer-reviewed publication contains the link to the resource. Do you consider that good enough?
No, that's just good for basically giving citations to authors. But it's not discouraged. What you should do, ideally you should cite both the paper, since it describes the resource, right? But you should also cite the resource itself, because otherwise the resource technically isn't cited. You just get to it in a roundabout, implicit way.
The resource is also not peer-reviewed.
But
so you're citing something which is not peer-reviewed. Is that important?
No, but you often provide citations for non-peer-reviewed stuff, right? Like you can have non-peer-reviewed abstracts of a conference, and
yeah, you can. But
yeah.
In case there is no peer-reviewed version, you cite a non-peer-reviewed version.
Yeah.
But, so yeah. Yeah.
I don't really understand.
I fully agree.
The hang-up.
Your what you're supposed to be best practice. Yes.
So this is source acknowledgement, right? But with full information, like things like authorship and stuff. Also,
but the paper describing the resource is everything you need to know, because the paper should describe.
Well, in Slovenia, you also get like citation acknowledgement for resource entries, or in terms of accreditation. Okay, so you're essentially proposing to, like, if you're looking at Lindet, and you find a corpus there, you're essentially proposing to ignore the yellow box which says, please cite the corpus this way.
There are plenty of other resources where it says, please use this bibliothèque entry to a paper.
To a paper, yeah.
I mean, you can give one example.
Yeah.
The other
But in that case, you're explicitly ignoring FAIR. You're not ensuring findability, and only in a roundabout way, right?
Well, if the web page gives you a suggestion of citing
Yeah.
paper,
Yeah.
when you use a resource.
Oh, okay. So what I'm suggesting is to ignore the citation instructions because I find them bad. I don't know. In such a case, I'd probably do. I personally would cite both. Use the BibTeX export, and then I'd see that, oh, it's just to a journal, and then I'd separate. But if there's no PID, then just the URL. Yeah. Thank you.
Small follow-up on Daan's remark about the machine actionability. I think one thing to keep in mind there is the recommendation you gave to include the version number into the title only. I think at the moment where you want to start thinking about automatic processing, for instance, and it would make sense to have it really, as Ortolan, for instance, did in a nice way, I think, have it as a separate field. It might complicate things maybe a little bit, but I think for the future and for kind of more advanced scenarios, it's advantageous to have the version number explicitly stored, I would think. But it was already mentioned here, this would form a good topic for a special seminar, so you definitely could have some follow-up.
Thank you.
Just 10 seconds to say, to bridge the gap between research papers and data sets, there are also data papers. So if you want to cite a data, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
If you want to cite a data set and you want a peer-reviewed thing that describes a data set, then a data paper can be the solution. So in the Journal of Open Humanities Data, we publish exactly data papers, and we've proven that they do help the visibility of data sets.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. Oh, sorry. What I'd also like to emphasize, I'm zoning in on the fact that people are ignoring citation instructions for well-defined cases. So like the CLARIN SI or the LINDAT example, where you basically have these instructions, but they're just then ignored. You just find the URL. So I guess not necessarily for these, I didn't think about these sorts of more oblique cases with data papers and stuff, but it's good food for thought. Thank you.
We are running late. There is...
I know, but there was Daria before.
No? Okay, so... One last question is...
I wanted to make a follow-up comment on the citing of the data directly. I mean, technically, CLARIN, I think, has solved this problem with the content negotiation header that is a requirement for B centers. So the technical infrastructure for citing the metadata in a human-readable format and machine-readable format is there. And ideally also the ability of then following the resource proxy information. Of course, in practice, not all this information is filled in a way that machines can use it, but that's more a human problem and not a technical one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Now, I thank Jakob for, and I thank you for this interesting discussion, but we have to move. We have to move to the third presentation. Pavel Kamowski will speak about new laws, new opportunities, the effect of the Digital Services Act and the Data Act on access to language data for research purposes.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone, my name is Pavel Kamowski, and I already told you this morning that I am chairing the CLIC and the CLARIN Legal and Ethical Issues Committee, and one of the things that we regularly do is we propose a paper, a presentation for the annual conference, and this is our latest deliverable, so to say. That's a committee work, really. So it's not only me, it's also my many learned colleagues who are listed here. Andrius, Alexei, in no particular order, Costanza, Mateja, Benito, and Sylvia. Some of you are certainly here. Thank you very much. Oh, hello. Thank you very much for co-authoring this. As a Nobel Prize winner said, the times they are changing, and we are indeed witnessing this with the European legal framework affecting data in general, data economy, and language data in particular. It all started with the announcement of the European Strategy for Data, which happened in February 2020. As some of you may remember, it was at the very beginning of the pandemic, just before the first lockdowns. Great times. And the aim of this European data strategy was to create a single market for data in Europe, and the famous common European data spaces, they actually come from this strategy, and they are an embodiment of this idea of a digital single market for data. And another objective of this strategy was to ensure Europe's global competitiveness and data sovereignty. So all this was then translated into the language of the law, and several regulations, acts, as they are now fashionably called, have been proposed. Our previous presentation from the 2022 conference already discussed the impact of the Data Governance Act on CLARIN. Digital Markets Act is not really that important for CLARIN, but Digital Services Act and the Data Act are of some importance for our community, and this is what this presentation discusses. Actually, the paper discusses both of them, and this presentation, due to time limitations, will be focused on the Digital Services Act. And Digital Services Act already applies. It's already in force since 17th February 2024. Now, as I mentioned, all these documents, all these texts, they are called acts, but technically they are regulations. So in the EU, we have two types of laws, so to say. These are directives and regulations. Directives need to be transposed into national law. Regulations apply without transposition. So there will be no national transposition. You don't have to wait for your country to do anything. It just starts applying everywhere in the EU at the same time. And Digital Services Act is a regulation, and if you are wondering if this framework that I'm about to present already applies in your country or not, it does, no matter what your legislator says, and that even if you are not technically an EU member state, but in a European Economic Area state, because these texts have the so-called EEA relevance, which means that their application actually goes beyond the European Union. So our colleagues from Norway, for example, they are concerned as well. Right, so what I want to tell you about the Digital Services Act is specifically its Article 40, which is about access to data from very large large online platforms. I was about to say very large language corpora, but anyway, very large online platforms, I'm sorry. What's a very large platform? Well, it's a platform that has more than 45 million average monthly active users in the European Union, but it's not up to you to establish whether the platform you're interested in is large enough or not. It's the European Commission that is actually keeping an official list of those large platforms, and you can see it on the side of the slide. And that includes Twitter, it's now called X, of course. It includes Facebook, and interestingly, it also includes YouTube and Wikipedia. So who wouldn't like some data from those platforms, huh? Very, very important sources of tasty data for language research. Now, what do you do to get data from those platforms for research purposes? Now, there is this stereotype about lawyers that they tend to be rough and boorish types that are only interested in, beer and football. but I'm not like that. I actually like finer things in life. So to show that, I prepared a drawing. So imagine you're a researcher and you want to use some data from a large platform. So what you do, you actually contact digital services coordinator. And this is not, there might be someone like this at your university who has a similarly named position, but it is not someone at your university. It's actually an administrative body. It's not necessarily an entirely new administrative body. It can be an existing administrative body that just has a new hat, a new function. So let me just give you some examples. In Denmark, Bente, for you, it's the Danish Competition and Consumer Authority. Poland hasn't appointed one yet. Belgium, unfortunately, sorry. But for example, Italy, it's the Authority for Communications Guarantees. That's the English name. So this is an administrative body that is charged with this mission. So you apply for a very special status that is called vetted researcher status. Now, in your application, you have to disclose a number of information. You have to be, in order to be recognized as a vetted researcher, you have to be affiliated to a research organization. That's an easy one. You have to be independent from commercial interests, whatever that means. That's subject to interpretation, isn't it? You have to disclose your funding sources. You have to demonstrate that you are capable, or rather your institution is capable of meeting the data security and confidentiality requirements. You have to demonstrate that the access to the data that you request is necessary and proportionate. You have to commit to making your results publicly available, free of charge, not technically open access, but of course open access is preferable. And last but not least, you have to demonstrate that your research contributes to detection, identification, and understanding of systemic risks. Now, what are systemic risks? They are defined in the law. There is a list of systemic risks. It's quite of a hodgepodge, really, if you ask me. It's a little bit all over the place, but I believe it only takes a small stretch of imagination to demonstrate that language research in many cases can contribute to mitigation and of those risks. For example, anything that can have a negative effect on the freedom of expression and information, everything that's related to discrimination, everything that has an effect on civic discourse and electoral processes, and even everything that may have negative consequences to the person's physical and mental well-being is a systemic risk, so it's quite a broad list. Now, if the digital services coordinator thinks you're worthy of the vetted researcher status, the institution, well, grants you this very special status, so you're no longer a normal researcher like this, but you are a much cooler looking vetted researcher. And actually, the European Commission is notified about every request. So the European Commission has a list of all the researchers who requested access to data from large platforms, regardless of whether the request was accepted or not. Right, and then it's the digital services coordinator, so it's this institution that requests on your behalf the data from a very large platform provider, which coincidentally is symbolized by this X symbol, like a treasure on a treasure map. And the large platform actually has 15 days. If they don't like the request, if they think that is excessive, they have 15 days to request an amendment. They cannot refuse, but they can propose changes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, air conditioning. And then the digital services coordinator actually has the last word. They have 15 days to decide whether they want to really modify the request or stick to your original request. And after this whole procedure that lasts no more than, thank you very much, most appreciated, that lasts no longer than 30 days, the platform grants you access to the data without undue delay and through appropriate interfaces specified in the request. That is, it's already in the request that you specify what kind of access, how this access should be provided to you, including through APIs. The digital services coordinator actually has the power to supervise your use of the data, and it can terminate it at any time if they decide that you no longer meet the criteria for being a vetted researcher. And the European Commission can adopt delegated acts with details on this framework. So that's, in short, this. I'm sorry. Now, it comes, it's a cool framework, isn't it? But it comes with some risks. And these risks can, I believe, be summarized as follows. I think there is a risk for the freedom of research. Are the interesting research subjects or the worthy research subjects predefined by the legislator? Now, can you simply do research on spelling in social media? Well, no. You have to do research on how spelling affects discrimination or mental well-being or gender equality. So precisely, what about ordinary language research? Well, it's not treated equally as research that actually has to do with systemic risks. It also creates the so-called Matthew effect. So bigger, richer institutions will get access to the data because they have means and manpower to go through the procedures, and smaller individual researcher or smaller institutions, PhD candidates, for example, won't necessarily have the knowledge about this framework, which will potentially be a handicap. And finally, a problem that I called who watches the watchman. I mean, all those coordinators, they are administrative institutions, so they are under political influence by definition. These are not judicial bodies. They are clearly closely linked to the government. Which leads me to believe that with the government change, the approach to systemic risks and the ease with which one can be granted the vetted researcher status or not can fluctuate. There is more where this came from. There are other frameworks that are interesting for our community. I'm not going to talk about them today, but if you're interested, check our paper. It's online, it's free, and thank you very much.
Okay, question? Yeah.
Thank you, Pavel. Very interesting. And my question is, many linguistic research is not about preventing systemic risks. Mm-hmm. So does that mean in this case, you do not have to follow the Data Services Act, and you can extract YouTube data in another way, process it, and perhaps even share it?
By all means, yes. So 2 remarks on this. Now, of course, I believe you can still use the sort of visible part, the sort of tip of the iceberg data from those platforms, the data that is accessible online. You can still harvest it and you can still use it under, I do believe, the text and data mining exception. Although this framework actually can allow you to have access to the data that you don't see, so not only the user-generated content, but also other data, if you demonstrate that this is a proportionate request. Secondly, experience shows us that now that this framework exists, so there is now a tool with which the administrative bodies can oblige large online platforms to provide access to vetted researcher to the data. Large online platforms can become more wary, more secretive maybe, and it can become more difficult to obtain the data otherwise. And we have, I mentioned that experience shows us this, we have this example with Twitter. Twitter stopped providing APIs for research. Coincidentally, I think it was in February, so when because they say, well, we're no longer, I imagine that wasn't officially the communication, but I imagine the reasoning was, well, now there is this framework. In some cases, we may be obliged to give you the data, so we no longer provide any convenient solutions for everyone to have access to the data, because, you know, why should we have two holes in the boat through which the data can leak when we only can have one, right? If you catch my drift. All right, but thank you for this comment, very interesting indeed.
Yes, thank you very much for the talk. You showed how this Digital Services Act regulates the access to the data, but once one has access and can do the research, is there any regulations what you can do with the data? So for example, can you create a corpus and distribute it?
Yes.
And I have a small second question. Am I wrong, or Telegram it's not included?
No, Telegram, no, let me see.
Because, for example, what fake news concerns, it's a very good research, this platform.
No, Telegram is not included, no. So fewer than 45 million average monthly active users in the EU, according to the European Commission. Right, and are there rules concerning what you can do with the data once you get access to them? Yes. These rules, depending on the type of the data, can be called, for example, copyright law, or they can be called data protection law, because this does not exempt the data. This only gives you lawful access to the data, but the data are not magically exempted from copyright. You still have to respect, so to say, property rights in the data if they are protected by property rights, or if they contain personal data, you still have to abide by the GDPR. This is why, as part of this application for a vetted researcher status, you need to demonstrate that you have you have the means, organizational and material, to meet the data security and confidentiality requirements. For example, prevent data from unauthorized access. So you have appropriate infrastructure that, you know, it will ensure that only vetted researchers have access to the data. Right.
Can the platform providers not easily refuse to provide many of their data because those data contain personal information, so they would violate Privacy Act, for example?
Not on
Can they be forced to anonymize or deliver them in an anonymous form or something like that?
These are the grounds on which a very large platform can object to a request. There is a limitative list. So confidential information, but not in the sense of privacy sensitive information, but rather trade secret, business sensitive information. And they have to propose specific amendments. It's like not that they cannot say we will not provide the data, but they have to provide something, but they can propose amendments. So we will not provide this, but we can provide this instead. So significant vulnerabilities in the security of the platform, that's one possible excuse. Protection of confidential information, what I believe will be used the most is that the provider does not have access to the requested data anymore. because it was deleted or something. It was whatever, encoded or merged, or is now part of an AI model only and no longer exists in a retrievable form or something like this. That, I imagine, would be used the most, because there are no, realistically speaking, there are no means to verify if that's true or not. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And now, the last presentation is about constructing the CLARIAH-ES CLARIN B Center, first steps, and the presentation, the paper is by Javier Conaga, Aritz Farwell, Joseba Fernandez de Landa, and Javier Arriegi. So,
hi everybody. I am Xavier Benaga, a technician at its center in the Basque Country University. Its center it's a center for language technologies located in the Basque University. It aims to promote research, training, technological transfer, and innovation in artificial intelligence focused, especially in language and speech. We are a multidisciplinary team composed of people that backgrounds, and very tall. People with backgrounds in computer sciences, linguists, and engineers. So it participates and is the office of CLARIAH-ES, the Basque node within CLARIAH-ES, which is a Spanish distributed infrastructure for CLARIN and DARIAH. Following CLARIN and DARIAH infrastructure's footsteps, CLARIAH-ES's mission is to sustain research that is related to Basque language and Basque culture by providing scholars within digital tools and resources. The consortium ultimate goal are to include supporting the inclusion of Basque language in the CLARIN and DARIAH project, ensuring that it has growing presence in this, contributing to advance of research in the humanities and social sciences, and opening the door to greater participation in international projects and programs, especially within European research area. The need to establish a repository that can be delivered technology to those focused on Basque language, research, and Basque culture is part of the motivation behind the creation of the CLARIAH-ES B Center at its. We also hope, however, that the CLARIAH-ES B Center will help meet networks' desire to foment a collaborative space from those who are working with Basque and Basque-related projects. Finally, by joining the CLARIN infrastructure, we will become part of a European network that is committed to provide stable access to digital resources and services. So, after reviewing the documentation from CLARIN, we identified several requirements, but we identified two main tasks, the correct rule shield requirements and the server infrastructure configuration. More tasks could be identified, but we decided to start with those two. So, the first requirement we met is the correct rule shield. It's the standard that provides a framework for building and maintaining trustworthy digital repositories that ensure the long-term accessibility and usability of digital data and metadata. There are 17 sections, and not all have not only technical aspects such purpose and mission, reliability, preservation, data quality, understandability, authenticity, integrity, security, legal and ethical property, and governance something like and show necessary funds or necessary staffing. And we've got doing that, we've got an unexpected result because it made us to think about what we are, what we want to offer in our repository, and how will we move forward. It helped us showing to planify what non-technical steps we should have or do. So other more technical requirements were identified, such federated identification, persistent identifiers, and metadata compliance. But those requirements we will satisfy adopting CLARIN DSpace. So as we start now, we are starting from scratch. It will be suit us. So the second task was to configure the infrastructure server. We have 2 servers, and we configured them in failover mode, planning to add a third one with a third storage system to ensure more reliability. We installed on them a Proxmox virtual environment to ensure easy management and high availability. We set up a cluster and we created a virtual machine replication for high availability. So we started the project, and the CLARIN DSpace 7 was going to be released soon, but it was delayed a little bit, so we started with the 5 version to learn about the platform. But after that, the DSpace 7 was published out of the box Docker ready, so we decided to install Rocky Linux, that is the system we use by default in its center. So more or less, this is the schema or our infrastructure. So we've got the web page with the project of CLARIAH-ES. The repositories with CLARIN, it will be with CLARIN DSpace 7, with federation using Sun and Shibboleth. Persistent identifiers are going to be with Handle and Doing, and metadata will be accessible. So we have plans to offer some services like text analyzer, a neural network lematizer, and text-to-speech and automatic speech recognition. And if you can, we are going to try to introduce the machine translation system, as much as possible, including in switchboard. So, at the present, we are in the advantage stages of building the infrastructure. Our goal is for this center to become a central resource to digital humanities research projects focused on the Basque language and Basque-related research. In a long term, to assist the other CLARIAH-ES centers in building their own centers. And additionally, we have planned to add the Basque language to the CLARIN DSpace 7 translation and adapt as resources to offer as services. We are committed to become a pillar for language and digital humanities technology research in the Basque region, and to join the CLARIN network in the near future. So that's all. Thank you for attention. And
question from the public. I have a curiosity for you, which is, in your opinion, which are the technological innovation that could help a CLARIN be center to manage the complexity of digital language data, in particular when translating to Basque, for example?
Well, I didn't. But so the 5th version of the Space 5 was translated to Basque, but the 7th one, I think there is no anything about that, and I think it's more complex, and it's got a lot of tags in the core to translate. So and it's not very complex, but it's an effort because we have to translate all. There are a lot of tags.
Okay.